Portfolio committees are at the heart of accountability in South Africa's parliamentary system. They play a crucial oversight role, scrutinizing government departments, tracking budgets, reviewing legislation, and even monitoring how policies are being implemented. To unpack their significance and whether they're actually fulfilling their mandate effectively, I'm joined now by Zukiswa Kota, who is a South Africa program head at the Public Service Accountability Monitor. Zukiswa, thank you so much for the time. I think this is an education session for me too. Won't you just explain how these parliamentary committees work, and are they basically higher than the minister, or how does it work?
Thanks, Arabile, and thanks for the chance to talk about a really important oversight structure. So in essence, parliamentary, or we should probably say legislature, committees of legislature, given that we've got the National Assembly and the provincial legislatures who have portfolio committees themselves. And we tend to sort of sideline the provinces a bit, which we really shouldn't in as far as the public discussion. But each committee essentially more or less oversees particular departments, is legislated or constitutionally mandated, one, to be a lawmaking structure, to oversee existing laws and policies and how those are implemented, and thirdly, to hold particular duty bearers, accounting officers, ministers, MECs, and so on to account. And so, yes, parliamentary committees, committees of legislature, portfolio committees do have the powers to seek, to summon, to subpoena MECs and ministers, to report to them, to explain and justify their actions or lack thereof. And so in essence, ministers, MECs, and their departmental heads are, because of that obligation, in a sense, there is that power dynamic as you outline it. So yes, in a sense, if we were to articulate it that way, members of parliament are in a position, a higher position, and as far as accountability is concerned, to MECs, ministers, and so on.
Yeah. So if you have something like the scope, you ask yourself then whether that would be able to ultimately tell something like the finance minister, for example, that he is not fulfilling his mandate according to, one, the budget that he put forward, and two, the goals of parliament or government set out by the president then as well. And this is why we're seeing this fractured stance then. When you see something like ministers who aren't then attending these SCOPA meetings, what does that do for the credibility of these parliamentary committees?
Attendance is really important. I think one important organization that does fantastic work tracking and parliament, or rather parliamentary proceedings, is the Parliamentary Monitoring Group. And a report that they put together, I think in the last 2 years, looking at the 6th administration, if I'm not mistaken, looked at ministerial and MP attendance to committees, and outlined a couple of interesting points. One being that some of the committees that tend to have higher attendance rates, both in terms of the MP's attendance, but also ministerial attendance, are those where there hasn't been significant change in as far as the bodies or the people that make up those contexts. The other is that committees individually can shape the ethos and the ways in which a particular committee is run, and where some committees the expectation is high for attendance to be high and for the kind of accounting to happen. So it's an interesting trend. There isn't, I think, as one would have it in any other context, there isn't a uniform sort of approach across the committees. But perhaps a more important issue to consider, Arabile, over and above attendance, is what actually happens when attendance is high, or in the context of committee meetings that do happen. So a minister can attend, but how much does the minister or particular accounting officer report? How detailed is their knowledge of their own department? How effective are the questions that are being asked by the parliamentarians of that minister or that head of department? And more importantly, really, what happens after that? To what impact does that attendance have on the bigger scheme, in the bigger picture? So attendance is important, is varied, but isn't, of course, the be-all and end-all. It really is about the substantive engagement in that committee.
Yeah, and they often say that nothing matters until it matters. And I say that because just think about the parliamentary committee meeting that we had on defense, right? This was exactly when we had the situation out of Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo, of course, then, and we had a part of our army situated out there, 14 soldiers, unfortunately, pass away then, and then all of a sudden, all eyes on that parliamentary committee. But then after that, nothing from it, and we seem to not focus on it too much. Does that go to some sense of the credibility of these things, or is that how it should be anyway? It matters only when things matter. And that the other time, we're hoping that the normal discourse of business is actually being undertaken.
It should really matter all the time. I mean, I think the example of the, defense, whether we talk defense or higher education, I mean, we've seen some, entertaining, I should say, deliberations or events happening in the committee relating to higher education. There's been other committees. But I think that the substantive, when does it matter, should it matter all the time, how fickle are these engagements, how fickle, are the, flash in the pan sort of situations. I think the answer to that really is that the fabric of parliamentary processes, the fabric of parliamentary committees should really be so robust, so tight, so the integrity of it should be such that at any given point, there is no need for the public to be skeptical or to wonder whether or not the interests of the public, whether the interests of the Republic are being served in the work that committees do, in the kinds of questions that are being asked, or in the kinds of policy and lawmaking decisions that are being made. So the important thing about public participation and public scrutiny of those committees is precisely that people are able to wonder, to ask the questions and to see for themselves whether MPs are in fact representing the interests of the people in those committees. And I think one of the things that there's been court cases, in fact, that have indicated, or the judgments have indicated, just how vital meaningful public participation is and meaningful public scrutiny of those committees. So Arabile, I think, it need not be that members of the public are responsible for ensuring that what happens in Parliament is what should happen in Parliament. But certainly our ability to see into Parliament, our ability to read up, to see the minutes of those discussions, to see the transcripts, to see the video footage of committee sittings is so important, precisely for the reasons you raise.
Yeah, how do we create more awareness about this, though? Because these are the committees that actually do matter. And sometimes the final pronouncements that are made by ministers, by deputy ministers, even by director generals, may not necessarily be the be-all and end-all, but the real answers sometimes get found in those parliamentary committees. How do we make greater awareness of the significance thereof and make people want to be a part of those conversations a little bit more by watching them, by looking at those minutes and those meetings, as you made note of?
So I think one particularly important element is the publicizing of those sessions. I make light of the notion of the theatrics of Parliament. We've seen some committees and we've seen some MPs and chairs of committees take a bit of a, to some extent, I think sometimes a bit of a problematic approach to holding officials to account. Holding people to account should not be the same as ridiculing people, should not account to creating sort of theatrics, while entertaining, and of course does bring people closer to Parliament, in itself may not achieve the kind of prospects. But I think that is one element. When people see and better understand what Parliament is all about, that it's not necessarily just this dry space where it's about sort of complicated budgets and complicated lawmaking and so on, but that actually the questions that should be on the platform are those that have quite often a direct impact on each of our lives. The budget, as you mentioned earlier, being one of those, questions of tax being another, and a range of others that have a direct impact on the ways in which we live, on our socioeconomic well-being. So the question of how do we publicize that? One is that we need more organizations, we need the media to showcase, to publicize, to raise questions, but importantly, to build the case for why it is that people should themselves participate. So it isn't just about researchers and academics or even business participating in the parliamentary space. In fact, we should be increasing the degree of knowledge around ordinary members of the public being able to sit in on their provincial committees. So if you live in the Eastern Cape or in KwaZulu-Natal, and you want to track what the MECs are saying in relation to health, education, and so on, whether the MPLs, the members of provincial legislature, are asking questions pertaining to the construction of schools, to the delivery of hospitals and medicines, and so on. Those are opportunities for people to also themselves sit in and raise awareness within their own communities. Members of provincial legislature, members of parliament aren't there of their own accord, aren't there just for their parties. They should be there for people. They should be there to themselves ensure that they are representing the good of their constituencies, and should themselves create an understanding of what their role is and bring people into parliament. So it sounds like a lofty idea, this notion of people being in parliament, but it certainly isn't. And we've seen how meaningful that can be.
Yeah, we certainly hope it matters more than just once, more than just when something topical is in the headlines, because that, I think, goes to the credibility of these portfolio committees, and it then loses, I think, its influence. And as you said, it begins to play out in ways that are perhaps more theatrical than sometimes need to be. Zukiswa, appreciate this conversation. Certainly have learned a lot, and hopefully we can have this conversation again.